Hello and welcome to another episode of the Working It Out podcast. I would like to welcome Hayley Lever to the Working It Out community. Welcome, Hayley.
Hiya, good to see you, Alex.
What we'll do is we'll jump straight in with our first question. So what we do with everyone is we have a big Working It Out locker where all of our guests put one item of their choice into our Working It Out locker. And whilst I talk, to give you a bit of time to think, Gary Laybourne on the previous podcast, he put in his club running vest because if you may have heard, he is so dedicated to his local club and he ran the London Marathon in it, and his children have worn it, done events in it, and he's very attached to that. But now it's in my locker. So is there one item you would like to induct to our locker?
Yeah, it's a really good question, this. And I was thinking about, and it links to later sort of what we'll get into, which is about my relationship with physical activity and movement over my life. But, if I'm really honest, the thing that I would bring just right now would be my little box of HRT patches, I decided.
HRT patches. So I haven't heard of that. What's a HRT patch?
I guess because for where I am in my life and my relationship with movement and physical activity just now is that over the last probably year and a half, I've sort of come to a realisation that I was being quite massively impacted by menopausal sort of symptoms and perimenopause and actually probably had been for 4 or 5 years and not really recognised it for what it was. So about a year and a half ago, I finally got to see a GP and have proper conversation about what was going on and started on a course of, on HRT. And it has absolutely transformed my relationship with movement as a real catalyst, I suppose, for me recovering and regaining my sense of self and energy for running in particular, because I had really sort of fallen off the wagon with the way that I would engage with my running over the sort of 3 or 4 years over COVID as well. But that was part of the problem. It was all wrapped up in, it was quite hard to work out what was going on, but I was not sleeping. I was struggling with anxiety and various things and just couldn't quite work out what was going on. And then finally getting HRT became a real catalyst for regaining energy, sleeping better. It's like an upward spiral of kind of energy, clarity, just feeling better in myself, which then enabled me to train. And it all came, I suppose it came from a conversation I was having at work about how I just didn't feel like I had the energy anymore to kind of run ultra marathons and run marathons. And it was a bit of a wake up call. So, well, why is that? It must be some kind of something that's driving that. And then, yes, which is why I then went to the doctor. So HRT has become quite a catalyst for me to regain my fitness and re-engage with movement, physical activity in a way that I hadn't just felt like I could for a while. So I'm bringing a little box of HRT patches.
I love that. We've got such a varied thing, a varied amount of things from pull-up bars to rowing machines, we spoke about Tim's earlier, to running vests. But HRT patch, I feel that's a really real answer, an honest answer. So thank you so much for that. I was trying to figure out how I was going to get this into the interview, because I know you blog, and I saw on your webpage, right front and center is the This Girl Can logo. And they focus on the 3 main life stages, and one of them being menopause. So is there a link there between This Girl Can and your current relationship, or how is This Girl Can front and center of Hayley's blog main page?
Well, it's interesting actually, because it's there because I think that was probably when I first set the blog site up, it held meaning for me. I think This Girl Can has been, one of the most transformative things in our work and in people's lives, in women's lives, when it comes to the way we talk about and think about physical activity, movement and sport. And it was such a powerful, and still is, such a powerful symbol of everything that I'm about, I guess. I suppose that's, so why is it there on my website still? Well, it's probably because it still resonates really strongly with personally and professionally in my relationship with movement, but also in life in general. I guess the menopausal, the interesting thing about the menopausal sort of stage of life is that the ironic thing is that I was doing talks and I was, writing about women's health, and I was on platforms and stages talking about why moving matters in the menopause, and not realizing that I was in it and it was impacting on me in the way that it was. So despite all that knowledge, I kept looking for other reasons why I might have been feeling the way I was feeling. So, and it's been interesting because I have written about this whole journey, because I went from feeling like I was just describing there, a couple of years ago, to then realizing that, and I was about to I was turning 50 last year. And so I went on this kind of real journey and decided that I wanted to run a sub 4 hour marathon.
Hmm.
And then I really set about, at the beginning of last year, for the first time in my life, like following a training plan. And it
No,
was
that's
it was funny
brilliant.
listening. I listened to a bit of Gary's podcast as well earlier, and
Yeah.
just listening to him and the way he talks about marathon running and your experience, it was just interesting, because I've run a few marathons, over
Hmm.
the years. In the last year and a half, I've weirdly become very, very, very structured and purposeful, and
Hmm.
I'd never stated goals or ambitions before in my life, and not
Oh, wow, okay.
particularly when it comes to running. And I'm known for sort of hiding away from the fact that there's a marathon around the corner, and sort of
Mm.
wanting, like, ignoring it, and certainly
Okay.
not saying I'm going to run that marathon in sub 4 hours or whatever. So I've gone on this really weird sort of journey where I'm now running to a training plan. And the other item I thought I
Yeah.
might bring with me was this watch that my husband bought me for my 50th birthday, which tells me my heart rate variability and my
Mm.
pace, and it helps me to find my way in the mountains and things. And that was the other item I was thinking I was bringing, because that has transformed the way I run, because I'm now running quite a structured and organised way
Mhm.
to a target and a goal. And so, but anyone who's ever known me, that's just never how I've operated.
Okay. Would you say that because you're more conscious of your menopause and you're going through a phase where you're taking control of it, would you say that control is bringing structure?
Yeah, and I think it's a life stage thing. My children are growing up and leaving home. I feel like I've got more time, more mental capacity. I've got a
Mhm.
demanding job, but there's a lot that's within my control and influence in how I
Mhm.
organise myself and how I organise my time. And I feel like I'm coming out of the other side of where everybody's needs have been first and foremost, in terms of being a parent of three children, etc., for the last 20 years. So in lots of ways, I'm entering like a new life stage, and I guess taking control and putting some structure is also about me. We're doing quite a lot of work with GM Moving around active aging and positive aging and strong aging, and that's also helping me to think differently about,
Mhm.
it's not about accepting that there's an inevitable decline and that I'm only ever going to get slower from here on in,
Mm.
because this year, I haven't said this out loud yet, but this year I intend to beat my sort of personal best marathon time.
Oh,
That's what I'm really focused on now. Whereas
mm.
last year, and that was prompted by a podcast conversation actually, where I admitted that I wanted to run sub 4 hours,
Yeah.
on a podcast with Eve in our team. And there's something about, for me, partly it goes back to this go can, showing that it's not an inevitable decline, modelling that,
Mhm.
demonstrating that. I'm one of the oldest people in our organisation, and I want to be a role model for active ageing, because that's a big part of
Mhm.
what we're doing. So yeah, it's multi-layered really. I think there's something about taking control. There's something about a new lease of life post
Mm.
50. There's something about becoming. There is a vulnerability in, isn't there, in sort of
Yeah.
saying, in stating a goal. And I wrote a blog about this last year, about the fear of failure, because I had to confront the reality that the reason I'd never actually stated a goal before was because there was a fear of failure in me that I
Yeah.
didn't really want to admit to myself.
For me, it's quite an interesting one because I am quite public with my goals and I don't mind talking about my goals. And I hate failure and I'm really competitive and I feel gutted. I aimed for a sub 4 marathon this year, and this is the first time I've said as well. I didn't get it. I struggled during the marathon. My knee started hurting. I decided to just slow it down, enjoy the experience, and I got 4 hours 17 something. But no, and I was gutted at first, but no part of me wants to do a marathon again. The training was way too long for me. I'm a team sport, football on the weekends type person, golf with the mates. The team sports is what helps me mentally. I don't need runs by myself, but yeah, the fear of failure has never really been there for me, which I feel quite lucky about. I'm not afraid to dive in, but I'm I'm very much jack of all trades and fail at everything. So that's the frustrating part for me. But we've spoken today already quite a lot about. We picked out a few different like key words in terms of emotions related to physical activity. But what I've asked for you to have a think about is when I say let's do some physical activity, what one emotion comes to mind? What one emotion describes your relationship?
Yeah, I think I've landed on gratitude actually. And I went to, when I saw this question on your list, I went to the Brené Brown book called Atlas of the Heart,
Mm-hmm.
where she explores emotion and language. And it's a beautiful book. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to, because gratitude was my overriding emotion for what movement, physical activity, and sport have given me over my whole life, which is, like you, very much a kind of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of. When I've participated in and engaged in like 100 different activities over my life and never been an elite performer. And that's something I've always loved, is the variety of things that I do. And
Yeah,
even now, in any given week, I probably do 5 or 6 different types of activity or sport. But when I
amazing.
thought about it, I was thinking like, what I'm grateful for is that my career, you know,
Mm.
is come out of that love of sport and physical activity. My life has been transformed by it, because when I've been exploring recently in blogs and things, the physical literacy work that's been
Mhm.
going on in England, and my relationship with movement over my life, and realizing that there were real key catalysts and pivotal moments in my life where my life chances were improved and my trajectory changed, and some real
Mhm.
sliding doors moments that came down to people. And it was a youth worker and a PE teacher and a sports coach. And there were these moments and conversations that would completely transform my life and bring me to
Mhm.
where I am and the job I do, and, the kind of life I have now. And so there's a gratitude for the way that physical activity and sport have carved out, created my life. Most of my close relationships, friendships, I met my husband through playing basketball. Most of my close relationships and friendships either were born out of people that I met whilst engaged in some kind of activity, or that's the glue that keeps us together, because we do things together, and that's how we stay connected with each other, as friends. Like tonight, I'm going to the pub with a whole load of women that I haven't seen for ages, but we run together and walk together and have done for the last 20 years while we've been raising our kids here and stuff. So there's a social kind of gratitude for the people that I've met through movement and sport, and just for the health, the physical,
Yeah.
but mostly these days as well, the mental health benefits of it. And that I've just got so much joy and
Mhm.
reward from having an active life, and I feel really privileged in that. I'm grateful for it.
So, in terms of gratitude, you've mentioned there's youth worker, coach, etc., family. Is there anyone in particular that stands out that you would say has influenced you the most, or supported you, or that you have the most gratitude for?
I don't think there's one person. No, I don't. There's many, many moments. And I didn't grow up in a kind of sporty household at all. Um, but in my school and community, there was that's just what we did. Our school, the first things I got involved with were in the primary school in the evenings, and there was just the things, apart from playing out in the street and playing out on the
Mhm.
green as a child. The first kind of structured and formal organised sport would have come through the gymnastics club that used to run in our primary school in the evening, which was run by teachers are amazing. I mean, back then, this is before the school strikes and whatever of the 80s. The primary school teacher used to run a gymnastics club 2 or 3 nights a week in the school hall. And that was the pattern throughout my school life, where teachers who loved sport, you know,
Yeah.
ran sport in the community as well. And there's a bunch of friends from my high school days in Coventry who we're all still really close friends now. And they were, there's a group of people who ran a basketball club, got me involved in volunteering in the club, really, stayed friends with throughout life. And then we still go walking and camping and stuff together now. Yeah,
Amazing.
so no one person, but lots of like amazing people who
Mm.
put in a lot to create opportunities in that community.
And so we've spoken a bit about teachers and schools there. The next part is around your earliest memory of physical activity. Is there a how far can you go back in terms of your relationship and how you felt about it growing up?
Yeah, I think it would go back to. So I grew up in Coventry in a working class kind of housing estate, and our across the road from our house was a green, square, no ball game sign probably.
Yeah.
We used to play football on that green, day in day out in the school holidays, and we used to play down the entry behind the house. We used to play all kinds of games, rally 1, 2, 3, and polo and things. We were just running around, constantly playing games, running around, but particularly playing football on the green because we were allowed to, because it was just across the road. So even quite a young age, we went and do that, and it would bring the kids from the community. There'd be half a dozen or a dozen people, and we'd just be playing football. And then as we got a bit older, so I started to spread your wings a bit, and we maybe be allowed to cycle with the next door neighbours to the nearby, just a couple of miles down the road. And you start to get your freedom, don't you, through riding a
Yeah.
bike, or we were allowed to go to the common, which was a bit further away than the green. And so all these
I
little places,
remember that.
the
Yeah.
common, the green, the entry. So they are places where we kind of hung out and
Yeah.
yeah,
I
played.
remember that quite well. Those stages, and I've spoken about a bit in a previous podcast around the kind of the time I was allowed to go to Richmond Park. I grew up in Surrey, South London area, and the time I was allowed to cycle to Richmond Park and go around Richmond Park was a huge day of freedom for me and my friends, because it felt like the size of Richmond Park. It was just, we had the world with us, and we had a football, our bikes, frisbee, everything, and money for an ice cream. The
Yeah.
day was set. So yeah, some great. I remember those days. So there's a lot around. So you're doing Coventry and going council estate. There seems to be a theme with CEOs and council estates.
Oh, not a
So
council estate. No, not a council estate. Just a normal kind of working class community council
yeah,
estate on the across that road over there. But no,
mm,
and well, that was an interesting thing because I grew up just across the sort of main road was then Wood End. So I grew up in Potters Green, and then there was Wood End, and then as I got into high school, like secondary school age, and the people who come to the school are from a wider radius, aren't they?
yeah,
So then a lot of my friends lived in Wood End, and we used to go over to Wood End quite a lot they had an amazing youth club over there, and they used to do all sorts of stuff over there as well. So yeah, that was the other thing, is kind of they call it the roaming distance, doesn't it? Grows as you get older. Yeah, it was an amazing place to grow up because everything was on the doorstep. The school was 5 minutes walk down the road.
yeah. That sounds amazing. So we've gone through quite a bit there, your earliest memory, but one part I wanted to pick up on is your close relationships and mental health. Those 2 points specifically.
Mm.
You said previously mental health, physical health, and now more these days, sport is good for your mental health.
Well, it's been interesting actually. It's making me think about maybe I just recognise it more now. But yeah, I mean, we all go through stuff in life, don't we? And if I think about the last 10 years, there have been bumps in the road, and some of that, and then there's the hormone related, the menopausal type side of things as well. But, whether it's grief or, struggles that we're going through in life, or if it's just the everyday kind of work stresses and strains, and I'm much more aware. Maybe it's a self-awareness thing of what I need as well as I've got older, and
Mhm.
you kind of reflect on, like when particularly, like say for example, when I had 3 kids under the age of 5, the sheer desperation to get out the
Wow.
door and do something different of an evening, once you've been sort of managing a family life. So the mental benefits, so I suppose when I was younger, it was more the social benefits that I really
Yeah.
appreciated, and it was fun and it was all that. And I think
Mm.
when you've got external forces and pressures, whether that's work, family life, demands, or grief, or you're dealing with loss or whatever. I've experienced all of those things in recent years, and I know that I need to run or walk or swim
Mhm.
or whatever, and I know that I will feel better, like in the very short
Yeah.
term, if not immediately, if I can just get out the door. Um, so so I'm very, very, very conscious of it, and it's so wired in now. It's just my first response to if I'm feeling
Yeah.
stressed. I was in work a few weeks ago and had a very difficult conversation or a call, and it was like a stress to kind of fight or flight moment. And I was like, I'm just going to go walk around the block. So I walked around the block from the office, down the canal, back again, 15 minutes, came back in and went, right, all good. What we doing now?
Yeah, yeah,
It's that
that's,
simple, but it's so wired in for me now that I don't really need to search for it. Yeah, I know
yeah.
what I
That's
need.
what golf does for me. I think I probably took to golf a lot earlier than most people, but there was definitely a point where, well, I work for Sport England now, and that I've put a lot of pressure on myself because I feel I've spoke about in previous podcasts is when I was a kid and I got challenged to be the CEO of Sport England, and I had it in my head that right, I'm going to set a career path out to work for Sport England. And when I got here, I put this heavy pressure that I needed to be perfect all the time, and everyone working within Sports England was amazing individuals. They are, but incredible individuals who are perfect all the time, and the level of work is so much higher than anything else because this is the pedestal I put it on. So as soon as I started working for Sport England, my mental health took a dive because I was just putting pressures. So yeah, golf really did help me.
Mm.
Just an hour and a half in the summer in an evening after a long day where it is just you can't think about anything else with golf. It's one of those sports where you have to forget everything, otherwise it just you can't play at all. And being outside for an hour and a half, just having a walk, even by yourself or with a friend, and just focusing on something different was huge for me. So yeah, I can see
Interesting.
that for you
Yeah,
too.
yeah, that just reminded me of something I was explaining to a friend last night about. So I started running on a track last year
Mhm.
because we're based at GM Movement, based at the House of Sport in Manchester, a couple of days a
Okay.
week working from there, and another office in town. But at the Etihad office at the House of Sport, there's it's a regional athletics centre, the track, and I had
Mhm.
never been on it, in the 6 years that I'd been working there, and then I finally summoned up the courage to try out this track malarkey because my training plan was telling me to do these like intervals and whatever, and
Yeah.
then. I absolutely love it now. It's wired in. It's Tuesday morning. I get the 6:30 train. I'm on the track, and the similar to you're saying there about golf it's so noticeable. If I'm supposed to be running to a particular pace, if I start thinking about work or life or something that's stressing me out or whatever, I
Mm.
slow down, and
Yeah.
it's so noticeable. So it's
Yeah.
like
So mental.
so then it's that focus. And I was saying to
Mm.
it's kind of meditative. You're running, you're just going round and round the track, which I would have said is completely boring. I mean, I live in the hills, I love running in the mountains. The idea
Yeah.
that you're just running around and round in a circle is
Well,
crazy
it's
to me.
painful for me.
But it's very different. It's a very different mindset. It's like mindfulness.
Yeah. I am one of those kids where growing up where I just wanted to be a footballer, and my mum used to say, "I'll do this because it'll help your football." So I was running county 800 meters because my mum was like, "It'd be good fitness for football. It'll help you get better at football." And I didn't really realize at the time I was probably better at running than I ever was at football. But I thought of running around a track now as a choice. When I did the marathon plan, and it was like said 8 times 400 meters, and I've got a tracker kilometer away, so there is really no excuse. A good warm up and some things. Doing it by choice, I was just like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. But yeah, so there's some interesting stuff, and we've started to talk about GM moving a few times now. So what would be really interesting to you now, hopefully the people listening have found out a bit more about you personally. For those who haven't met you yet, could you give a bit of information about your role and your organisation and their overarching names and what they do?
So I'm the chief executive of GM Moving. So it's one of the active partnerships across the country. So I've been working in GM for 7 years now, just over.
Mhm.
My role when I first came to Greater Manchester was around the time of devolution, and it was funded and still is funded by the NHS in Greater Manchester Combined Authority and Sport England. And the purpose of the role then was to kind of lead the whole systems approach to physical activity in GM Moving. And and then in 2019, just before the pandemic, I took on the chief exec role at the active partnership as well, sort of combined
Mhm.
role. So 4 years ago, I've been leading the active partnership, and in that time, we've got a really pivotal role, in that whole system approach as an organisation, active partnership as a charity, to lead and support and connect the GM Moving strategy. So GM Moving strategy is across the whole system. So the partnership board that governs that is the Combined Authority and Sport England
Mhm.
and the NHS and Transport for Greater Manchester. It's community and volunteer sector, it's community leisure, public sector leisure, GM Active. So we're bringing together a whole range of organisations to really lead, provide that strategic leadership for this agenda. And then the active partnership, and as an organisation, our team are organised around the different areas of that strategy to really provide that leadership and support and connect into all 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester and working across every possible agenda to make moving everybody's business. And
Yeah.
it's an incredible, privilege to lead that organisation and this movement in Greater Manchester. It's a real joy every day.
So there's an interesting word there, and it's a balance between when I was doing my research, what it says on GM Moving, that kind of their statements, and very much how yourself and some of your colleagues frame what you do. You will talk about movement and moving, and GM is with even the name GM moving, but under the punchlines of what it says is around to reduce inactivity and increase participation. So when I was listening to some of your previous podcasts, it says I don't really talk about physical activity and inactivity anymore. It's about movement in general. Could you give people a bit of an idea of why you think in that way?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I mean, even in this conversation, I would refer to movement, physical activity, and sport. It's, when it
Mhm.
comes to me and my life and the work we do, with I suppose what if I think back, because I've worked in the physical activity and sports sector and sports development and policy for 30 years now, and
Mhm.
I've become more and more sure and more clear, and the evidence is clearer that if we want to make moving everybody's business and really create, an active nation and address the inequalities that we have and that are persistent in this country and other places, then we need to take the widest possible lens on what
Mhm.
that includes. And I mean, I've examples every day of where people have felt excluded or outside of sport and have had negative experiences of PE and sport over their lives, and such that there are real barriers there to people's involvement and participation in an active life. And I've had a really clear example of that just this week. And so in conversation, because my work, when I got to Greater Manchester, my job was to open doors into every part of the system, into the
Mhm.
NHS, into adult social care, into transport, into planning, into highways, environment, all of these spaces. If I walked into rooms and talked and led with the language of sport, it was really clear that it limited people's
Mhm.
engagement or involvement in the movement, because there were people for whom they went, well, that doesn't speak to me or my experience, and I can't see my role and contribution or the relevance of it to what I need to achieve here in my role in transport, for example. So what was very clear is that we needed to talk a different language if we were going to make meaningful connections with people across the whole system. And we also did a really important piece of research early days with Britain Thinks, with focus groups and conversations around people who were furthest away from living an active life. And it came through very, very strongly in that research, and reinforced by loads of wider research that's going on around the country about how people felt outside of sports participation. So we know that sport plays a huge role in an active nation. And we also know that I think Tim talked about this in his podcast, didn't he? About if we want to increase sports participation, we need an active nation. It's
Yeah.
turning it around, isn't it? Because we used to, for a lot of my career, it was been focused on sports development and the hope that if only we could help people find their sport, we would have an active nation. And that
Yeah.
it's so. But actually, what we need to do is create the conditions for people to move in loads of different ways and to be active, and then some people, a proportion of people, will engage in formal structured sport in the way
Yeah.
that we might think about it. But our mission is for people across Greater Manchester to live active lives, and that can be everything from walking to work, walking to school, cycling, scooting, wheeling, taking part in sport, dancing. We need people to move for all the benefits that movement brings. I wouldn't say I don't talk about physical activity or sport. I would say you have to be multilingual and translator between And it's entirely dependent on the audience and the person that you're trying to engage with. And the most powerful question that we ask, and that, to open up a space for connection around this, is, how does moving matter to you and your work?
Mm-hmm.
And I have not found anybody who can't make a connection to
Yeah.
movement, to why moving matters, to the thing that they're, the mission, if you like, that they're striving for, or the outcome they're striving for. So it's about it being more inclusive. If we're going to, address the inequalities and the people who engage in active lives, then the widest possible lens gives the best possible opportunity to do that.
That's great. And I've experienced the same thing in terms of when, just on one of your points, when you said around what movement is, and it's so much broader than sport. When I was first going through education and my degree and trying to find my first job, a lot of my friends see the sector as, oh, so are you going to be, you're going to work in football, or are you going to work in rugby, or are you going to work in netball? What job are you going for? And I said, I don't really care what the people do. I just want to motivate people to have a happy, healthy, physical life. That's what I want to do. And a bit of a joke, what a program I used to look after was called Get Active, Stay Active, and I tried to drop it in everywhere, but as a name. But it is true. I didn't care what it was. I just said to the students in my first job, "What do you want to do? Well, let's make it happen." So it's as much as exactly what you're saying, and what Tim went back to is, how do we get people moving, and then if there is a sport for them, or if they're happy just walking, dancing, whatever it is, how do we just create the conditions for them to continue to do so? So
Yeah,
thank you for that.
and then I'll just pick you up on it there, because this
Mm.
is so wired into us, isn't it? Is the word just. So this
Mm.
the example that I was just referring to from earlier in the week is where trying to help somebody to see that it wasn't just dancing or just
Okay.
yoga,
That's what I
because
did
that
say,
suggests that there's a hierarchy of what's important or what matters, isn't it? And it is so wired into us, this, particularly as people who love sport and movement. But this person that we're in conversation with was like, well, I don't like sport. I don't like sport. I don't like exercise. So no, I can't answer that question. And then when you kind of open it up and you go, well, how do you like to move? And then it came to, well, I love yoga, and I love to dance. But there's no just in that, is there? There's no
yeah.
hierarchy of value when it comes to formal structured sport participation being more than yoga.
Yeah.
It's,
And that's a really, really good point, and I'm glad you picked me up on it, to be honest. I've never really thought of it in that way before, so definitely changing the way I'll be talking about it. I am we also, in that, and speaking about GM moving, you said around the whole systems approach, and a lot of, if someone was to Google your name and find your blogs and see your posts, it's spoken about a lot about who you are, what you believe we need to do, and you said that's what GM moving is doing. So this next part is around mapping out the causes of inactivity. With Where does your thought process start? Is it around a whole systems approach, like you've said a couple of minutes ago, or do you think broader than that, and are you narrowing into a whole systems approach?
depends what I'm trying to work out. I think I wrote a blog recently. I tried to pull together some of my favourite models and tools and ways of and lenses through which I look at
Mm.
things in order to help me with my work. And Tim talked in his interview, didn't he, about the COM-B model, and COM-B model is kind of at the heart of GM moving as well. And the other thing we use a lot is the socio-ecological model. So looking at what are all the things that influence how much I'm going to move today. And the socio-ecological model was a real kind of eye-opener for me when I first saw it, probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, or where it was recognising that there are all these layers and layers of influence, around your social
Mm.
environment and your organisational contexts, and influences, and the policy and the built environment. Because for such a long time in my career up to that point, like I was saying before, it was almost like, we just need to develop more and better sports programs and projects that will get everybody into sport and activity. And that model, the first time I saw that, was like, okay, no, there's much more that's influencing how much we move, isn't there? And so
Mm-hmm.
it was permission, like it unlocked permission to think much wider, and it gave permission, I think, to think about active travel and active environments, and the way in which policy influences our day-to-day lives as individuals. And then I was reading and exploring some thinking with a colleague, Scott Hartley, a period of time looking at some sort of anthropological stuff and stuff around culture. And so we added a culture layer to that model. So because it
Mm-hmm.
becomes really clear that our mindsets and our beliefs and our assumptions and our hierarchy of values and our worldviews, also collective worldview, drives some of the, so it's almost like you've got this kind of cultural influences that at a population level and at a global level sort of drive all of the policy and the built environment and the organizational influence, etc. So we use that a lot, and we use it in so many different ways. So we can use that model and that way of thinking to think about one specific, quite specific area of work. So colleagues in the last couple of years have done some work called Right to the Streets, which is around safer streets and for women and girls. And the whole Home Office project was constructed using that diagram of what are all the cultural influences, policy influences, built environment influences, on the extent to which women and girls feel safe on the streets. Because feeling safe on the streets is absolutely vital if you're going to get people out and moving. And so we use it in really practical ways. We also use it as a bit of a kind of understanding of what's influencing at a micro level, but also at a kind of population level. So that's really, really helpful. And I suppose linked to that is, once you understand what all the influences are on how much people are going to move in a place or in a demographic group or whatever, you can then work out, well, who are the key stakeholders and influencers in that. And so then if you're going to do like a systems diagram or a stakeholder mapping of who is it then you need to work with in order to change those things and pull the levers in those different areas. And that takes you to a whole different place, because you realise that if you've only been working with the sport and physical activity sector, or the education sector, but you're not working with transport or planning or highways or policy, then you're going to be limited in the extent to which you can make change happen. So those have been really, really important tools for us in our thinking over this sort of last 6-7 years.
So, well, firstly, thank you. That was great. We've spoken about Combi model, as you said, and Tim, I've got him to really dig into, if you were going to focus on one part of that, what would you do? And he picked the opportunity side. With the socio-ecological model, you said there's layer of influences, and you mentioned culture. If you were to say, thinking about all the different layer of influences, we're talking about England in general, is culture one that you are most interested in, or is there a specific layer which you feel this is where my skills, my expertise, this is something that I would like to focus on if it was me setting up my own business?
I think it holds a huge amount of potential. If we could all think about the collective worldview that drives some of our mindsets and beliefs and language, and take the conversation we just had about just, the word just,
Yeah.
that comes from a collective worldview that formal, structured, competitive sport is higher up the hierarchy of values in society as a whole than yoga. So if we could unlock a different kind of collective worldview, that people who just do yoga or just go for a walk don't feel inferior or don't feel like it doesn't count, how much potential that holds for change. Because we hear over and over and over again on a day-to-day basis from people who feel excluded or marginalised from active lives.
Mm-hmm.
So much of what's in the way is in beliefs and assumptions and values and worldviews. And actually, it doesn't cost lots of money to change the way we think.
Mm-hmm.
So it also holds potential, because there's always this ongoing conversation about how there's no more money, there's no new money, there's no, and a mindset of, if only we had more money, we could change the world. Well, actually, I think we can change the world by changing the way we think and see the world and how we talk. And I know that for sure, because I've seen it happen over and over again in the work that we've been doing. So the culture layer, it is where I spend a lot of my time thinking and exploring new ideas, because I know it holds so much potential for
Mhm.
change. And we can, and I wrote a piece last year, and it was about worldview, and it's like, are we pushing, we're pushing water uphill if we're not challenging existing beliefs and mindsets and the dominant worldview that's holding these problems in place. So that's the space that we're experimenting in, really, is what does that mean in practice, and how do you go about changing culture? And the Active Souls movement is probably the neatest example of that, where
Mhm.
changing the rules that we make up in our heads about what you wear on your feet to work has been transformative in Greater Manchester. And it didn't cost a penny, and it wasn't in the plan, and it wasn't part of the strategy. It was born out of the frustration that a colleague of mine was holding about the fact that she had to keep high heels under a desk and, change from her trainers to her high heels when she got to work, as she'd walked across town from the train station.
Mhm.
And, so it's just, and now it's become that absolute norm to go to work in shoes and clothes you can move in.
Yeah,
And
that's really interesting because from a Sports England point of view, we spend quite a bit of time and to justify the need to invest in campaigns to create these behavioural change movements just because of the scale. But and your point around it's cheaper to change the way people think. That's kind of, those two things conflict a bit. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on from a like this gal can point of view. Could you see that being delivered differently then? Because it from a more micro level way of cultural influence, if we use the social ecological model.
No, I think this girl can. I think I'm not saying you don't need money. I think but
Mm,
you can get more bang for your buck, if you like, if your work is informed, as this girl can was and is still
mm,
informed by real people's voices, real people's stories of what's getting in the way. Because don't forget the beginnings of this girl can. The strongest message that came out in the beginning of the This Girl Can research was about fear of judgment.
mhm.
Now, we'd never really been honest about that before in my career, and I think what I'm really excited by, in our work and uniting the movement and GM moving as a whole, is we are finally naming the real nature of the problem, and this girl can led the way with that, because it was acknowledging that there is sexism, there is misogyny, there is fear of
Mm,
judgment, there is shame, there is all sorts of stuff that's wrapped up with why women don't participate in sport,
yeah,
and we'd never really admitted that before. And there are
that's
so many
really
examples now of where we are admitting the real nature of the problem and confronting the brutal realities of why these inequalities are still being held in place. And there's a courage about us collectively at the moment, I think, that is just amazing to see kind of growing.
that's why I'm fascinated with this girl can absolutely. I speak about this a bit. My dissertation at university was around barriers and motivations to females,
Mm.
and age 16 to 25. I think it's just a really fascinating age as well. And through the research, it was what are your barriers and motivations, and what are your motivations to do activity, and it was to keep in shape, stay toned, and then I was saying, are these the things? So I went back to the drawing board with my professor and said, can I change this to be about more bit about perceptions and ask a different type of question. So it was, why do other women participate in physical activity? And whilst it's the same thing, the wording was different. It was to lose weight, to look good, rather than to keep fit and stay in shape. So it's like, so now we're starting to hopefully understand and be honest and open. So obviously, there's a lot more than what women think about other women, but that was just the iceberg moment for me. That example. So it was to really the whole This Girl campaign is really interesting to me. It's interesting that it definitely is linked here, and yeah, not just being open and honest and really focusing on what the problems actually are.
And then you still do need to resource that then. So you still need the
Mm,
campaign. If you can get, if you thought about theory of change kind of approach, if you're asking yourself a different question at the beginning, it will lead you to a completely different place. If we keep asking the same old questions and trying to, expecting to find a different answer, we never can get the change, are we? But I think we're asking ourselves better questions these days. We're more prepared to confront the realities of how we've been a part of the problem, and also we're recognizing that what you need to invest in, how you use your investment can then be so much more impactful if you're asking really good questions and not making assumptions. And a big part of that is listening to different voices, and different voices of experience. And we've got, examples, some of the work, like the Right to the Streets work around women and girls. We've got an LGBTQ plus network where we're, exploring people's experiences of PE and sport over their lives, and confronting the realities of how excluding those experiences have been takes you to a different place in terms of what the solutions are. And then you would spend your money differently and hopefully not recreating more of the same problem.
So when we're looking at mapping this map and creating this map for England, and what we're attempting to, and then we've spoken a lot around socio-ecological model, areas of influence. We spoke about understanding people in a specific place, their needs, their wants. How micro do we go? How place specific do we go? Because you're thinking GM moving at the moment as the organisation you're CEO for. Do you look at Greater Manchester as a whole place, or do you go dig into area specifics within that and the different environments within that? How far are we digging into Manchester?
Yeah, so everything for us starts with people, a person-centred kind of approach. And I suppose the question we're always asking ourselves is at what scale does this thing need to happen? So there are some things. So when I think about our local delivery pilot, place-based work, it's layered. There's some things that we do across the whole of Greater Manchester because they make sense. There is an efficiency and a scale at which it makes sense to have an approach which is GM wide. So that's evaluation, it's data and insight, it's marketing, communications, campaigns, it's people and leadership development work. There's some things that make total sense to do across the GM layer, if you like. Then there's 10 different boroughs, and those 10 boroughs have got their own identities and their own set of conditions. And then there are within that neighbourhoods. And so our job is to kind of create the conditions in which in any neighbourhood in Greater Manchester, the conditions are maturing and better set for people and communities to be more active. And so at a micro scale, if you think about an estate or a community or a town within Greater Manchester, its own mini system. So where I live, there's a mini system, which is the community organisations and the clubs and the doctor's surgery and the school and the shops and the businesses, and it's a micro system. And so it's completely scalable. So you can think, well, what are all the influences on how much people move in this community? And as a volunteer in this community, how do we pull all the levers to create the conditions for people to live good lives and to address the inequalities? So there are a set of questions you can ask yourself, which are, what does it make sense to do at a community level? What makes sense to do across the whole borough? Because that's part of a system that functions in a way, and that's a construct, but it makes sense to do some things at a Tameside level, an Oldham level, or a Manchester City level. And then there is this kind of layering of what makes sense to do across GM. And then there's a national set of conditions and contexts that can be created in terms of how if we could get to a place where there's a whole cross government approach to, in a really deep and meaningful way, that every single department in government and every single national driver is creating better conditions for this community in this borough. That's the work, isn't it? So there's a whole system in terms of sectors, working across sectors, but then there's also a geographical layering of that. And there are some things like Uniting the Movement sets a completely different set of conditions for everyone in England who's working on this agenda. And it's transformative. And it makes sense to do it at an England level.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's the interesting point there, which Gary speaks about in the previous podcast around a cross-government approach to sport. I think one thing he was quite passionate about seeing is having more presence, or someone that sits across, or sport to sit across all departments, whether it be DFE, etc. Do you feel that that is needed as well, or what's your thoughts? What specifically do you mean by like a cross government approach?
Yeah.
Is it how do they interconnect, or do you feel sport and physical activity just needs to be more embedded within each department?
So, yeah, no, that's a really good question, because it is. I've seen it's really powerful to see the potential when parts of the system for whom this isn't their core business get it, and they understand. So, for example, this week we've had the Greater Manchester Cancer Conference, and Greater Manchester Cancer System is doing amazing, amazing work, and movement as medicine, as part of the cancer pathway in the cancer system in Greater Manchester, is growing and embedding and maturing all the time. The understanding and the belief that moving matters in the cancer services and
Yeah.
systems is growing. And so, you know, for me, I can point to evidence across sectors and across agendas within GM where you're really starting to see it change now, where it's like, this matters to you, what you're doing matters to me. It's that reciprocal, the win-win of, if we can get people walking, wheeling, cycling, using public transport, that's good for the environment, and it's good for air quality, etc. in Greater Manchester, and it's good for me because my core business is people moving more. So that's what we're looking for all the time, is the kind of reciprocal relationship between the agendas and missions that we're focused
Mhm.
on. So if you think about that in a national context, it's always a perennial question, is like, which department should this sit in? I don't think, quite often people say, oh, should we move from DCMS into health? I don't think that's the answer either, because we need transport, we need, housing, we need education, we need health, we need all of these departments to play their part in supporting people to live more active lives, and vice versa. We need to play our part in the things that they're driven by. So for me, it needs to be across government, and I don't know, I've been thinking about this, about, is there an example of something that we've done in this country, or a country has done, where it's a mission or a goal or a outcome
Mhm.
that's being sought, and it is genuinely across government, and is, where is it sat? Like, what's our best example of how you take that really collaborative approach to something that matters? And I haven't been able to think of an
Yeah,
example. The best thing that comes to mind for me is the Future Generations Act and the Future Generations work in Wales. But it's still early days, and you can't say it's worked yet, can you? Like, it's so early days.
yeah,
So for me, like, the Healthy Britain report is a really good example. The Healthy Britain report is the closest we've come to that being described, and the idea of having a kind of cross-government approach and a minister for well-being, for example, or that. So where would it sit? Does it sit in Treasury? Does it sit
mhm.
sort of slightly outside of the departments? And it's like a what's the word? Like a unit.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can point to somewhere where we've done it before, but that probably tells you that's why it needs to be done. And then it's about the scope and boundaries of it. So I don't think that's just around physical activity and movement. I think it's much broader than that. And whether it's well-being, whether it's future people and planet, like, how broad a mission is that? Moving us into health isn't the answer for me.
No, I agree. I think it'd be really interesting to see a unit going across, and yeah, it's interesting that it's come up again. I think that's a perfect place to stop there. Thank you so much for today,
Thank you. It's given me some things to
and
think about.
definitely, hopefully, we've definitely got a lot to add to the map as well, and definitely a lot to throw out to the listeners. That lots of things that we've spoken about. So, if you are listening now or listening later, do head over to the LinkedIn page. They're working it out on LinkedIn. I will also be posting it on my page. Really encourage you to share your thoughts, because the idea is that we're going to put out this causal map, put all the stuff that Hayley has spoken about today, add a lot of it to what Gary and Tim have spoken about, because there's some crossover there for sure. But then you listening, all your thoughts and comments also go onto the map. So please do also comment and share. And challenge anything I've said today. I'm sure Hayley wouldn't mind a healthy conversation debate on LinkedIn as well. If you've got different feelings or you want to add to it and build on it and think, well, we should be working this way. So I'll leave that there. Thank you very much again, Hayley, and
Thank you.
hopefully speak again soon.
Yeah, take care. Thank you very much.